So we will start, if we follow the model that we did in the first section, we will start with a question from the audience. I'm going to ask if we can keep these two questions and not commentaries. We'll start first with somebody from the present in the room or from the audience. There's a question all the way in the back. I'm trying to make you walk up the stairs. Or somebody here. I'll let you. The first hand I saw was in the back. I think I'll let that jump in there. I think we should give her an applause for walking.
Yeah, look, I put my hand up before. I put my hand up before as a farmer. That was actually a bit of a fib. I'm an ex-farmer. Now, what I discovered about farming is that it's a quick way to spend all the hours God gives you in the hardest labour on earth and still go broke. Now, I tried to turn the family farm organic as a way to try and make it profitable. Didn't work. But in the process, I learnt about soil carbon, I learnt about the soil microbiome, I learnt about the vital role of soil in the carbon cycle. Now, I'm interested, everyone possibly might have seen on Q&A, the hobby farmer from Tasmania tried to tell us a bit about the vital role of soil. Of course, he was cut off, typical Q&A. But I wondered whether perhaps the whole of the panel, but obviously especially Verity, might like to say something about the role farmers can play in reversing the problem of how agriculture has contributed to global warming by killing off the microbiome, by releasing all the carbon that's been stored in the soil. How can we turn that around and start to draw down out of the atmosphere carbon and store it in the soil?
So, thank you for the question. It is such an important area, so I'm really glad that you raised it. There's a fantastic quote from Mark Wootton, who is a farmer down just north of Hamilton, and the way that Mark phrases it is that carbon sense actually makes economic sense, and that's really true for a lot of farmers. So actually, the more carbon that you're able to lock up in your soils, generally, the better release of other nutrients, the improved water retention, all of these factors create side benefits for farmers as well, in addition to pulling the carbon out of the atmosphere in a way that we desperately need. We've got, Australia has had its first soil carbon credits sold, so the first ACCUs issued, which was out in Gippsland, which is really exciting. And it has been quite extraordinary to see the incredible level of engagement from farmers around soil carbon, because really, you know, when your topsoil is blowing off in a dust storm, no one knows better than farmers the importance of trying to hang on to that. And there's really exciting examples from the sugarcane industry, from the grazing sector, of where farmers are being really quite creative and exploring a whole range of strategies to be able to lock up more carbon.
Other speakers have a comment? Okay, so thank you for that. Fantastic. We'll go to our next question, which I think is in front of me. So when from Lois, I think, when the rural sector is so badly impacted by climate change and there are progressive organizations like Farmers for Climate Action, why are so many national party climate change denying politicians elected? I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, but we can have a commentary before we
Political scientist. Look, I just think that our electoral system is what it is, right? And we have moments in our political system where people have an opportunity to express a preference, and it gets aggregated and it gets preference, etc., etc. And in between those moments, we have a whole range and other avenues for people to express. But I will say that I think the National Party is on the nose in the bush, and I think if you want to read more about that, you should read Gabrielle Chan's book, a fantastic book. I forgot the name of it. Yeah, Rusted Off. You know, and the rise of independence and they may not be getting up, but there's certainly a swing in lots of rural and regional seats towards independents that are pushing forward action on climate change. Helen Haynes, for example, and Cathy McGowan in India's seat's a good example of that, fairly moderate positions, but very strong on climate change and things that they're hearing in their electorate. And the final point, just, because I've been doing lots of interviews with people in India, is that the National Party, the people in rural and regional Australia are not all farmers. In fact, the farming community is a small community. This is no disrespect to what your organisation is doing, but there is a huge constituency out there that benefits from the farming community, but they are not farmers themselves. And so I think there's a lot of people in rural and regional Australia that find the National Party it's not an organisation that speaks to them as a party, but most of us are finding out that all the major political parties as well. So it's a global phenomenon as well.
One of the things, so I've come back from a couple of weeks in central New South Wales talking to people about their attitudes toward the future of the region, and questions, not that I asked, questions from people I was speaking to were being raised about what is the future of regional politics. And so it's a really challenging place to be in, where you have this party that you trust to look after your interests, and you don't see any other party that you think you can trust to do that. And so shifting to an alternative vote is a really big call, especially when we've got this city-bush divide is so pernicious, I think. And it really affects the way that we think who's looking after our best interests and who is likely to make decisions that will support me as a person. So we have to think about all of these dynamics about who is like us, who is the us that we're talking about, and who will represent that us. And it's not such an easy choice to think that we should expect that people will change the way that they vote, when voting is such an important thing for us as people.
I'll preface this by saying that FCA is a charity, so we are strictly non-partisan. That's my disclaimer. But second to that is the fact that, parties are complex. And so to talk about the National Party, for example, the National Party positioning at a state level in multiple states is phenomenally different to what we see coming out of the federal party room in the past week. So we actually need to be able to grapple with the complexity of multiple tiers within a party system as well. And there are some really good things, there are some really good initiatives that have actually been led and shifts that have occurred within that particular party, but they've been happening at state level. And we've still got a long way to go before the level of, climate literacy is there with our elected representatives in rural and regional Australians. And I know for FCA, that's work that we are doing every single day.
Thank you. So the next question from Peter. Governments, large corporations, the military all understand what's coming. Why is there so much delay in serious action? Is it just too hard? Are we locked into a growth-based economic system? Is it too hard a political message to sell? That's a lot of questions. What will it take? So, is anybody going to...
I'm not going to answer all of that, but I will just tap into something that Verity said, but translate it over into the sort of our three-tiered system of government here in Australia, and note that I think at the state level and certainly at the local government level, there is enormous action on climate change. And I think, the model that Sally Stiegel's just put forward for this legislation that she's putting forward as a private member's bill, this is modelled after, obviously, the UK, but it's something that the Victorian government Parliament passed in 2017. So there are very forward-thinking state governments, and our state governments are the ones that basically keep all our services ticking over, right? Our hospitals, our education, and so much of our media focus is on that federal level, and of course they do play an important role in steering national reforms. and obviously the military is in their jurisdiction as well. But I do think it's important to recognise the innovations that are happening at the state government level, and that they are driving, and in the business sector are driving reform upwards. And I think we tend to focus on what the federal government is not doing, and even within federal departments, I think there's quite a lot of attempts to open up strategic thinking in, for example, defence, home affairs. I mean, we call these sort of like the sort of policy entrepreneurs within the system. I think they came out in the last session. So,
one of the things that comes out to me from Pete's question is the growth-based economic system. And one of the challenges with an issue like climate change is that all of us perceive of the problem and the potential solutions in different ways, and we're bound differently. And one of the points that can be perhaps a point of division among mass movements on action on climate change is this idea about whether we can fix the system that we've got or we need to change the system entirely. So you can have people coming together for a shared outcome that might have different views on that question, but at some point that's a tension that will quickly bubble up to the surface. So if certain folks are operating on the idea that we can fix the system that we have, whereas other folks are operating on the idea that we need to completely change the system that we have, that will lead to very different ideas about what are our priorities, what are the sorts of concessions that we make, how do we structure timeframes for policy implementation and things like that. That's not really an answer, it's a deflection from the very complicated question, but there are important aspects to think about, which is, are we all talking about the same thing? And what mental models about the world underlie the ways that we talk about these issues?
If I can comment myself, I think implicit in the questions that we're all asking in this way is something like, why can't we all come to agree that this is a problem? And I just think we need to remind ourselves, and I'm saying this more as a psychologist, that we often can't agree on a range of things, and most of the time it doesn't even matter. Okay, here it matters. So maybe in this room there's some people who think that humans came about because of the way Darwin tells us, and others in this room think that humans came about because the way it's outlined in the book of Genesis. Really, you can agree to disagree. You don't really care. It doesn't matter. Okay. I guess what I'm trying to point out is that humans debate and disagree over things all the time, and that's part of being human, I would say. The critical thing here is that those of us, many of us, all of us in this room, and many others as well, recognize, believe that this is almost or is an existential threat, and that's what makes us a bit anxious about why we can't come to an agreement in this context. But we have to remember that disagreement means that we need to come together, as Verity was saying, with different groups and renegotiate our understanding of reality, of truth, and our values. And so it's a perennial question. It will always be with us, I think, and it's a matter of fora like this, speakers like this, and the ones we saw earlier to come together and help us engage in this discussion, to come to a shared understanding and a shared sense of values that will help us move forward and think forward. All right, I think there was a question. I know there was a question right here.
Hi, just a really quick question for Bec, specifically about in the middle of your presentation you had the data about one-sided and two-sided statements and complexity of how people handle complexity. I had a lot of conversations with climate change deniers, and I must admit when I saw your graphs, the two-tiered response really appealed to me, and I thought, oh, that's how you would explain it to a climate change denier. I was just wondering, if you could give some examples of the sort of one-sided approach, for example, would you give a fact-based statement, or would you just say something like, that simply not true, or yeah, how would you respond?
Thank you for the question. So the place that I see that information having the most direct application is in this question about myth busting and fact checking. So there's some evidence to suggest that myth busting or fact checking can end up perpetuating false information, because by repeating it, we build the accessibility of that false claim. And so in some cases, it can be useful, instead of repeating a myth in order to then provide the correct information, it can be better to simply ignore the myth and just try to amplify the information that has better evidence base. But something else that's emerging is some of this interesting research around how we can engage with critical thinking. So there's been some research around this idea of inoculation, where you can tell people these are the sorts of techniques that are often used to misrepresent data. And you build the familiarity with those techniques, and that can then make the sorts of people who might hear that information go, I can see the pattern here, I know what's being done. And so it's those sorts of settings where if you're engaging with someone who likes to really get into the complexity, that's where it can be valuable to step through, where there's a claim that's not based on evidence that's used in opposition to a claim that is based on evidence, and to explore the dynamics that are happening.
Okay, thank you. I see here, I've got a list of things. I think we may have answered a question from Lois already, so I might just skip ahead and give it another project to say to Lois, give someone else a chance. And I've got a question here in front of me, JR. So, given Australia's Indigenous communities have first-hand experience of surviving the extensive environmental and climate change following colonisation, how can we place Indigenous communities and knowledges at the centre of climate adaptation actions, especially since their voices have been so absent in today's session?
That is such an important question, and we can all start by supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We can recognise the truth of what has happened in this country, what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are asking us to recognise. We can support an Indigenous voice Parliament. We can support the empowerment and self-determination of Indigenous Australians, and that's a way that we can be able to learn from the expertise and the knowledge from the connection.
And I think on a sort of very practical note, coming from, I guess, as an educator, I mean, there is a lot that we can do as educators also to bring Indigenous knowledge into the classroom, and also allow our students to share those experiences. So I'm thinking, for example, at the moment, I have a PhD student, Justin McCall, who's doing an amazing PhD project on the way in which Indigenous communities are using native title to advance their representative claims, not so much about land rights, but around a whole range of issues of inequality. So he's deeply networked into his Indigenous communities, and he's bringing some really fascinating insights that will then inform the way in which we can better understand how we can listen and be more effective at bringing those absent voices into policy making, but also in the way we understand issues. And the other point I would make is I think that it's been fantastic that there's been such an opening of Indigenous practice around fire management. Like, it's really mainstreamed that idea, which I think for many Australians wasn't really on their radar. So I think, tragically, the disasters actually prized open some willingness for people to start thinking it's not just about national parks versus kind of, backburning. There's actually other ways of knowing.
It's such an excellent question. And last year I had the privilege of being in Adelaide and hearing from Sally Scales, who was representing the 10 Deserts people. And one of the stories that she was sharing was that it's actually becoming too hot in some of those regions. So 10 Deserts sort of covers North and South Australia, parts of WA, and up into the Territory. There's a cluster up there. And she was sharing the story that it's actually becoming far too hot for them to actually be able to carry on traditional practices, going out onto their law grounds, etc. And one of the questions that we put to Sally was, well, how can we how can we get your voice heard? It was exactly the question that was just put here. And the response was shattering. Because what she said to that audience in Adelaide was, you white fellas need to raise your voices, because when we do, no one hears us. And I think that's the hold on all of us in this room, is to do what Bec and Carolyn are talking about, is elevating Indigenous voices, but to also make sure that we are doing everything within our power to ensure that climate change is front and centre on the agenda for those who are not yet being heard.
Well, I've got many other questions still, and some of which, like Dave's question, I think we've kind of addressed a little bit, so I'm going to jump ahead again. I hope people aren't upset with me for kind of picking and choosing. So I've got a question here from Emily. How can climate activists and other concerned Australians put pressure on the federal government? This is kind of following your last comment, I think. To put pressure on the federal government to do more than they are when they're adamant that they already have sufficient policy to meet the Paris Agreement targets. I can't answer it myself.
Look, I don't think there's one magic bullet, and I think the climate movement is doing a great job in trying to push lots of in different ways. I mean, I think more could be done, which I think is our settled strategy at the MP level, that we can encourage individual citizens to put pressure on their own MPs to really ask them how are they going to vote on this climate bill, and hold them to account for the votes and the decisions they're making. I also think there's a lot that can be done through the global sphere. So I think some of the delayed response from the federal government, or the in-time swift response that sort of eventuated, was through a lot of outward external pressure of the global community saying, what the hell is going on with the leaders in Australia? And I don't think we can underestimate that kind of, celebrity input. And I know it doesn't feel like a particularly democratic move, but I do think that there are the world is watching, on lots of levels about how Australia is responding. I think the climate activists are doing a good job in trying to bring those really important kind of, I guess, what do they call them? Sort of, social media identities into the picture. And I do think trying to leverage at points in our governance systems, through the market, through the corporations, through the small businesses, through schools. I mean, I think there's just so many openings, and I think the climate activists are doing that. But it is a business of trying to mainstream. I think that the Extinction Rebellion, certainly in the UK, I think has managed to do that. It's not just perceived as a bunch of kind of green valued people getting together. These are mums and dads and everyday people who are pushing along that agenda, certainly in the UK context, I think.
So one of the difficulties is that if we say we want climate action and the response is we've got climate action, and so you have to say, oh, but the target's not quite right, you've got to adjust it a little bit, and the baseline year is wrong, and our year for the target is wrong. It's a much more difficult message to put in a placard to create change around. So it's difficult when it's kind of shades of grey in a way. And this is where I think, to go back to this idea of conversations, it's about starting to build this awareness that climate change isn't a single issue where we've got a button that we either push or we don't push, but there's lots of different dials that all play into it. And we can only start to understand and grapple with how complicated it is by having more of an understanding of these issues. And we get more of an understanding by getting access to information. We receive information by talking to people that we trust, who we think we trust. So I think we've got to build the literacy, like Verity was saying, around climate change, but also climate policy. How you influence the federal government. I'll hand over to Verity.
I'll be really quick. There's, the way that I look at this, is that there is three core components to this. One is the community mobilisation, and that is ensuring that the community, and in our case, the farming community, and by extension, rural Australia, has an increasing level of climate, carbon, energy and to some degree political literacy, so that they're able to be effective advocates for change, both within literally in their own, front paddock, but also in the halls of Parliament. So there's the community component, there's the media component, and ensuring that you have the right voices in the media to be able to effectively cut through. I don't know how many of you are watching Q&A on Monday night, but my husband's on his second marriage, and I can to tell you that if he tried the Kyoto analogy of saying that he washed enough dishes in his last marriage, things would be over. So having voices that are able to cut through in sometimes creative ways is really important. And then the other component is engaging with a political strategy. And that doesn't need to be a partisan political strategy. I think this is the key point to note here, is that having a political strategy involves doing things like getting engaged with structures like the Parliamentary Friends of Climate Action, which Rebecca Starkey, Helen Haynes, Zali Steggall have all been influential in. Engage in those structures at both state and federal level, and you can actually start to achieve some degree of political momentum. And it's not going to look like a perfect silver bullet scenario. It will be fragmented, it will be messy, but it will be some degree of progress rather than stagnation.
Okay, thank you. I've been told that we're over time, and I apologize for that. So I'm going to put a closure on that. A summary note, I think, from this section is respect, voice, debate, listening, identity, and we can make it happen. Thank you very much for outstanding presentations. Thank you for coming.